Hi everyone, the title of this video series is Why I'm Still a Christian. The name itself implies that I was already a Christian to start with, so I wanted to go through and give a quick kind of snapshot of my Christian walk. I think it's a good place to start. I grew up in a Christian home. My family were involved in the Pentecostal church for my whole childhood, my teenage years, and then the early part of my adulthood. We were involved in 3 different Pentecostal church movements in Australia during that time. In addition to the church we went to, I also went to a Christian school for the majority of my schooling. That school was a Baptist school. Now you need to understand that if Pentecostals are focused heavily on experience, then Baptists are focused on the Bible and correct theology. The two together combined to give me a balanced mix of head and heart. Now when I was considering what to say in this video, I considered giving a spiritual biography, so to speak, giving a summary of my church experience. For the sake of getting to the point, I wanted to instead describe how my faith has developed over time, because I think that'd be more relevant to this topic. I've been a Christian for 30 years. In that time you experience a lot of different things and your faith takes a battering. The teaching and beliefs you receive get tested. There's a number of things which I used to believe that I no longer believe because they don't line up with reality. The first one is about suffering. When you go through difficult times as a Christian, you have to somehow make sense of suffering. If that suffering is significant, it's even more pressing to make sense of it. What I discovered was that I wasn't given a strong theology on suffering, and many churches don't teach well on it. One of the biggest reasons people give for walking away from God is the existence of suffering in the world. It's something you really have to grapple with. My thinking has developed a great deal on this subject. There are forms of Christianity that teach either nothing about suffering or teach that God wants you to live a wonderful life with minimum suffering. I don't agree with this anymore. Suffering is part of the Christian life, and there are biblical ways to think about the purpose of suffering. This is relevant to mention because it has bearing on whether God exists or not, since so many people find this hard to reconcile with a loving God. The second area my thinking has developed is God's sovereignty. I know of Christian movements that teach that prayer can change anything. So in other words, prayer can change any situation. There are a lot of Christians who honestly believe that the flow of human history is dependent on the prayers of Christians. Let me give an example. I'm making this video in 2020, and there are Christians who claim that the church has to pray that Donald Trump will be re-elected at the next election. With that view, prayer can change anything, even major historical events. I don't agree with this view anymore. It's a view that elevates human beings to a higher position than that which we really inhabit. I believe that God determines the flow of human history. I believe we can change some things with our prayers, and I see biblical support for this. However, God himself is the ultimate one who decides what actually unfolds in the major events of history. This is important to talk about since I'm seeing many Christians drifting away from a correct view on God's sovereignty, and that then impacts on how they're able to defend their faith. People will ask us Christians, where is your God when bad things happen? As a result of this, God's sovereignty is a relevant question to the defense of the Christian faith. So why should you listen to me? I do bring a unique voice to this conversation. I tend to think about ways of defending the Christian faith that takes a different perspective to some others. I'm aware that I'm going to give arguments that will be compelling to some people, but for others they're going to fall flat. I guess it really depends on how your brain is wired. Something worth pointing out is that people don't stay Christians because of one singular argument. It's always comical when atheists give one good argument and expect Christians to give up their faith based on that one argument. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis that's relevant here, and it sets up the overall structure of these videos I'm going to make. So the quote is, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." That quote resonates deeply with me and explains something important. When you're a Christian, you see the world through a Christian lens. Having seen the world through a Christian lens for 30 years, I'm thoroughly convinced that through it you see the world more accurately than with a secular or atheistic one. First off, in this series I'll talk about the big arguments which I believe are the most convincing ones for Christianity. Secondly, in line with that C.S. Lewis quote, I'll talk about the aspects of life and reality which make more sense when viewed through a Christian lens. If the Christian faith is true, you'd expect that it would offer a clearer, deeper, and more meaningful way of seeing life and reality, and I'm going to argue that it indeed does. Let's talk about atheists and skeptics for a second. I've heard Jordan Peterson say that rationality and reason are great servants but terrible masters. Now don't get me wrong, I'm the kind of person who thinks that reason and rationality are great things, and I'm convinced the world would be a better place if these things were used more often. However, I think that atheists and skeptics are people who are slaves to their rationality and reason. When it comes to considering the existence of God, there is definitely a place for emotion and subjective experience. I have no time for a way of reasoning that purely discounts the subjective. If God exists, there should be objective arguments and evidence, but the subjective can't be discounted out of hand. Living by rationality and reason alone is no way to live, so why would you approach the existence of God in the same way? It makes no sense to me. That's something I'll talk about more in upcoming videos. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.